The first speaker would be Dr. Nawazish Sheikh, and she'll be speaking about the introduction and identification of suprachoroidal hemorrhage. And later on, we'll be moving to the management aspects. So I welcome Dr. Nawazish for the IC, please. Thank you.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. So at the outset, I'd like to thank Dr. Saurabh for including me as a part of his instruction course. So I'm Dr. Nawazish, and I'll be introducing you to what suprachoroidal hemorrhage is and how to identify these patients intra-op as well as in the post-op period. So we know that suprachoroidal hemorrhage, as Sir rightly pointed out, it's a devastating complication that can occur in virtually almost all surgeries. So it's the collection of blood in the suprachoroidal space, which is bound anteriorly by the scleral spur and posteriorly by the optic nerve. So usually the suprachoroidal space is a collapsed place wherein there is roughly 10 microliters of fluid present, and through osmotic diffusion there is no fluid normally present. So in this space, when blood gets accumulated, it's suprachoroidal hemorrhage. When fluid gets accumulated, it's choroidal detachment or choroidal effusion. We can classify it on the basis of size, we can classify it on with its relation to surgery, or we can classify it on the precipitating event. So when I classify it based on size, it can be limited or a small suprachoroidal hemorrhage, or it could be a massive suprachoroidal hemorrhage. A massive suprachoroidal hemorrhage is usually lobulated, limited by the vortex vein ampullae, and they may be massive enough such that they could lead to kissing choroidals, or whether two mounds are touching each other or there is retinal apposition. Where if I classify it on the basis of relation to surgery, they could be immediate, that is during the surgery, or it could be delayed in the post-operative period. When it occurs during surgery, it can cause expulsion of the intraocular contents, leading to an expulsive hemorrhage that was termed by Terson. If I talk about the precipitating events, it could be post-traumatic or it could be spontaneous. Spontaneous would be in patients prone to bleeding diathesis, like anyone on anticoagulant therapy. The basic pathophysiology is such that we know that the long posterior ciliary artery traverses the suprachoroidal space via the horizontal recti and moves and supplies the iris root, whereas the short posterior ciliary artery enters through the optic nerve and goes across. So when there is fluctuation in intraocular pressure and blood pressure for the patient, there is rupture of these long posterior ciliary artery, leading to accumulation of the blood in the suprachoroidal space. There are multiple risk factors that can be associated with suprachoroidal hemorrhage, broadly classifying them into systemic, ocular, perioperative and post-operative. So in systemic, the most important ones are advanced age, arteriosclerosis, hypertension, blood dyscrasias or coagulation defects, and diabetes mellitus. So all of these cause changes in the vessel wall, making it more fragile. So even minor changes could lead to their rupture. When I talk about ocular, there could be choroidal arteriosclerosis, glaucoma because IOP fluctuations, myopia because the scleral rigidity is lower, so it can fluctuations can lead to rupture of blood vessel wall, aphakia and pseudophakia, choroiditis, recent intraocular surgery, and history of suprachoroidal hemorrhage in the other eye. When I talk about perioperative factors, studies have shown retrobulbar anesthesia without epinephrine is a risk factor for development of suprachoroidal hemorrhage. Sudden hypotony, presence of Valsalva, or the patient is coughing during surgery or straining during surgery, trying to squeeze his eyelids. A complicated surgery in which vitreous loss has occurred is also a risk factor, as well as any intraoperative systemic hypertension that occurs. When I talk about post-operative factors, if the patient undergoes trauma in the post-operative period, such as a patient who has undergone a penetrating keratoplasty and then experiences blunt trauma as small as touching with his finger to the eye, can cause a suprachoroidal hemorrhage. Ocular hypotony in the post-op period through leaky wounds, Valsalva in the post-op, coughing, straining, constipation in the post-op period, as well as TPA administration. So the incidence with improvement in our surgical techniques, the incidence has dramatically reduced, but glaucoma filtering surgery does still have a high risk up to 1.6%, mainly because of the sudden hypotony that may develop in these patients. Now moving on to identification. So if I have to talk about intraoperative identification, then it's the change of glow during surgery or loss of the red reflex. It could be as quick as the change in 1 second. So you're seeing a good red reflex and in a second it goes dark. So these things should make you aware that there is a chance of suprachoroidal hemorrhage occurring. Another thing would be shallowing of the anterior chamber, as well as at times extrusion of your viscoelastic from your anterior chamber, shallowing of the anterior chamber with prolapse of the capsule, and if severe enough, the intraocular contents might try to extrude out from your wound. And if limited, we may be able to see visible mounts during just posterior to your posterior capsule. At this point, whenever we identify, we need to go ahead and keep a calm head and move towards management, which will be covered in the next talk. When I talk about the post-operative identification, we can have some peculiar scenarios that may take place. We might have a good media with limited suprachoroidal hemorrhage that you can see towards your right hand side. So we can see the disc, the macula, the posterior pole, but you can see a large mount in the supratemporal quadrant of the retina. Or the media is clear, but there is massive suprachoroidal or kissing choroidals that is visible just behind the IOL in the left hand side of the image. Another scenario could be that there is media opacity with suprachoroidal hemorrhage. So in the right hand side, there is some hyphema in the anterior chamber. We cannot visualize the posterior pole. Whereas in the left hand side image, there is penetrating keratoplasty has been done. So we cannot visualize the posterior pole. So for these cases, ultrasonography B scan is the modality of choice, which can help us determine, one, the presence of suprachoroidal hemorrhage, to decide the timing of intervention. So the image on the right hand side shows you that there is a suprachoroidal hemorrhage present, whereas on the left hand side you can see two massive mounts associated with vitreous hemorrhage in the vitreous cavity. The utility of USG does not just end with identifying a suprachoroidal, it can help you classify whether it is a hemorrhage or an effusion. So the management would change besides the clinical scenario. A suprachoroidal hemorrhage would usually have a high IOP, whereas a choroidal effusion, would have a hypotenuse eye. Again, utility of USG lies in this, that we can not only differentiate this, but as well as identify kissing choroidals. So in the right hand side of the image, you can see that there are choroidal mounts, but because they are not opposed to each other or there is no retinal apposition, we can wait and watch and go for conservative management in these patients. Whereas on the left hand side, you can see there are two mounts with vitreous hemorrhage in the vitreous cavity, and they appear to be opposed together, or what we call as kissing choroidals, which require immediate intervention. Another thing that USG can help us determine is the timing of intervention or timing of drainage in these patients. Usually when the hemorrhage liquefies, there will be change in the consistency of this choroidal choroidal mound. So in these patients, then accordingly we can decide the timing of intervention. So my take-home message would be that you adequately diagnose it if it's occurring during surgery, you keep a calm mind and go ahead with your management. If it's in the post-operative period, you intervene at the correct time.